We live in a world where one single emotionally charged decision can cost us everything. Our marriage, our most important relationships, tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions, or even 3 strokes in a matter of 30 seconds. And that's why today's conversation with COO of Decade Golf, Alex Huang, hits so hard because Alex brings nearly 2 decades of professional poker playing to the table, where he also brings a wealth of mathematics and statistical knowledge, an abundance of golf experience and success, both personally on the course and coaching LPGA and PGA Tour players to today's conversation. He's going to break down how poker tilt and golf blow-up holes are the same problems in different clothing: impulsivity, entitlement, and emotion hijacking decision-making. Alex and I are going to talk about long-term decision-making, why variance doesn't excuse bad process, and how numbers can act like bowling bumpers that keep you from derailing when your expectations outpace reality. I had so much fun during this conversation, and I want to make sure you fully understand who Alex is. I alluded to some of his successes, his long list of knowledge and expertise. Today, again, he's the COO of Decade Golf. He works with several dozen LPGA and Epson Tour players, as well as many of the top 10 college programs in both men's and women's golf. He specializes in distilling complicated golf data and ideas into simpler heuristics and concepts. And he's spitting straight fire on Instagram. You can follow him on Instagram at Alex Huang Golf. And buckle up. I tell you every time, have something to take notes with. We move 1,000,000 miles per hour in this conversation, so you want to be prepared. And before we do dive in, I want to remind you, the 90-day Golf Identity Upgrade Accelerator, it's live. It's available. There are still a few spots left. This is a private 3-month coaching container designed to help serious golfers rapidly upgrade their beliefs, rewire their golf identity, and accelerate lower scores through deep subconscious transformation, not surface level band-aid tactics. If you're ready to make playing to your potential a habit, I encourage you to shoot me a DM on Instagram at the Paul Salter to learn more about joining the 90-day Golf Identity Upgrade Accelerator. Without further ado, let's dive into today's conversation. Alex, you've lived in 2 worlds where emotions can literally bankrupt you: poker and golf. And I'm curious, in your vast experience in both, what did those arenas teach you about the cost of impulsivity?
That's a great question. You think in poker, right? The cost of impulsivity is simply whatever money you have in front of you, or whatever the tournament entry fee was. And it's certainly similar to golf, where one catastrophic decision or one downward spiral where you're kind of chasing a previously bad decision, or as we used in poker, the term tilt, that can lead to your demise. Just as on the golf course, right? You blink, you make a triple bogey because you got a bit greedy or a bit thoughtless or reckless with a strategy. And very different arenas, but also 2 extremely similar lessons and skill sets that you require in order to have success.
How do you get your athletes now on the golf course, and please share from your professional poker playing as well, to really keep that mindset of long-term thinking, knowing that you have 18 holes across 4 days, or if you're a cash game grinder, there's tomorrow, or even if you're a tournament grinder, there's also tomorrow, or if you're playing online, there's one in an hour. How do you help them really maintain that long-term thought process?
Yeah, it isn't easy, right? I think that poker and my experience with it really instilled this idea of, we always call it like the long run, right? Thinking of your poker sessions not in this singular 8-hour window where you're at the casino, but more of like It's just one long session. Now, obviously, golf, ideally, you have that same mindset, but unfortunately, there is like a cutoff after 54 holes or 72 holes that determines the outcome in the winner. And so I think one of the biggest challenges is really getting players to understand that both games, right, are just mired with variance. And Lady Luck plays a very strong role in both games. And it's so critical to understand, like, just because you lost your pot going all in with aces pre-flop does not mean in hindsight you now look back and say, like, I should have folded. Much the same way with golf, right? You pick a good target, you make a committed swing. Maybe you get a bad bounce and you end up in the bunker, or maybe you get unlucky, you wind up in a divot. Well, at the end of the day, you can't now look back and think that you made a bad decision, and you need to just be able to move forward and, take that moment to reflect. Sometimes there may be a lesson to be learned from it, right? Poker's the same way. Maybe you made a greedy bluff on the river and it cost you. And yeah, mistakes happen. And that's part of the challenge of both games is it's a game of resilience and it's also a game of adaptability and staying fluid with kind of your process and understanding that, like, yeah, I'm not going to play perfectly and things aren't always going to go my way. I'm going to face turbulent times. But how I prevail on the other side is so critical to not only future performance, but also just like staying centered and present.
I love that. How do you define resiliency and how do you help the athletes you work with continue to develop that skill?
Yeah, resiliency to me is like I've been fortunate that as a personal trait, I've always remained a very curious person. And I think that
Mm.
curiosity has allowed me to grow professionally in all of things that I've done. And it's similar to sort of traits that you see in elite poker players and elite golfers, right? The best golfers I work with, they stay curious and they do not let their score sort of define them, right? They don't finish a round of
Mm.
golf where they shoot 6 under and immediately think back and think, I played that perfectly, right? They're willing to go back into the weeds and kind of identify potential things they could have done better. Much the same as with poker, the best players may have a winning session and come out ahead in profit for the week or the session, but they're going to go back and they're going to consider, like, could I have bet 10% more in this situation and still gotten my opponent to pay me off? Because if so, that's 10% of profit that I left on the table. And having that objectivity, and again, it's that whole removal of emotion. It's so powerful because that's how you're going to get better. Right. It's not just walking off the course, shooting 5 over, being upset, and mindlessly hitting balls on the range because that's kind of what you do. It's being able to look back and reflect and say to myself, like, I got a little unlucky in the sense that, like, the entire round of golf, I was just kind of in bad gapping in my club setup. And it wasn't anything I meaningfully did. Maybe I just got like a firm kick in the fairway because the fairway's firmed out a little bit. And that's just sort of like the term, the rub of the green when it comes to golf. There's just these little subtle, nuanced things in golf that will kind of dictate what your ceiling or potential is for the day. And the biggest pitfall that players make is, you get a bit unlucky on your gapping for the first 11 holes, and you just kind of are constantly hitting the green to 25, 30, 40 feet, not any great birdie looks. Then on hole 12, you hit it to 15 feet and you tell yourself, like, this is the best birdie look I've had all day. And then your mind starts racing. And you're like, this is my first chance at a real quality birdie look. And we all know what happens from there. Get a little aggressive. You run it by 5 feet. You miss the comeback, or you blink. You made a dumb bogey. And then you think to yourself on the next tee, what just happened? Right. And like that type of process is kind of that downward spiral that I always talk about trying to avoid, both at the felt, on the poker tables, and on the golf course.
So I love that. And I have an imagination because a lot of my athletes experience a similar, unfolding of self-talk. They finally stick it to 15 feet. Like you mentioned, the first 11 holes, they're nowhere close. And then the self-talk starts to sound like, oh, I have to make this. I have to, I should to, I need to. There's that desperation and neediness. How do you talk someone off of that literal ledge and help them reframe their ability to stay with the tried and true process, even though this moment might be their best chance at a birdie so far?
Yeah, as a numbers guy, I like to typically support it with data. So when I'm
Mhm.
caddying, right, and I can just kind of sense my player wanting this a bit more or whatever, I always use the common analogy of, like, if I gave you a full deck of cards and I asked you to draw a diamond out of it and you drew a spade, would you be ticked off? No, right? But then how many times have they stood over a 14 or 15 foot putt? upset that they didn't make it. And it's like, well, your odds were actually better with that deck of cards, right? So understanding and contextualizing these things in situations or environments away from the golf course can oftentimes help to clear their head because, at the end of the day, when you're 15 feet, the name of the game there is like kind of leaving yourself a tap in and just hoping you may get a bit lucky in making it. So when I am with players, it's kind of providing that constant reminder of like, remember, like, you're more likely to miss this and not make it. So don't get so intertwined and like put all your chips in this emotional basket of like, I need to make this or else I'm going to, blow a gasket.
Yeah. So I often talk about whenever there's a large gap between expectation and reality, that gap invites in the negative self-talk, the uncertainty, the doubt, and then the decision making from a place of fear, worry, and anxiety. Explain to us how mathematical understanding and awareness, true number data driven information helps to close that gap to allow a person to remain resilient and process oriented.
Yeah, numbers don't lie, right? Like, how are you going to refute the reality that, like, on tour, an 8-foot putt is about a coin flip, And it's like these guys or girls that I work with, most of you guys aren't tour quality players, and you absolutely aren't playing on tour quality greens. And so having better expectations than that is simply setting yourself up for failure. And like it's easier said than done because obviously in the moment as high performing athletes, they all have the highest expectations of performance. But when you're able to kind of use those numbers to help center things and like pull them back a little and rein them in emotionally, it can make all the difference. Not necessarily in that moment, right? Because they're still going to try their hardest to hit the perfect putt, but really just structuring the rest of the round and keeping them from derailing, right? And it's about like I always say, the numbers kind of are like bowling with bumpers. They allow you to just kind of waver a little bit, but not go so off track that now the next thing you know, you're making a quadruple bogey because you're pressing, because you're trying to get a bit greedy. So like having those numbers handy, they may seem annoying to some of my players in the moment because, it's like they've got other things to worry about than hearing me ripping off these probabilities. But at the same time, again, it's meant to just kind of keep them on track so that they don't waver too much and start deviating from the game plan, because I do think it's so critical with players to like kind of go into a course knowing obviously like what your T targets are and kind of how your rounds cadence should kind of go, and having that playbook is hopefully a crutch for them so that when the emotions are a bit high, they're able to kind of revert back to it and use it as a method to kind of once again regain their composure and stay a bit more objective with like the goals at hand.
I just imagine you caddying for me and being like a statistician on demand. You're giving me all the data. I would personally love that because I'm a numbers guy as well. That would definitely put my mind at ease. Bringing in a bit of, I'm going to call current events. Something I've seen going around social media lately is the tour average in putting from various distances having declined over, I don't remember if it was 3 or 5 years. You might be able to add clarity. What is your thought, your gut feeling or hypothesis as to potentially why that trend is occurring?
Yeah, I haven't looked too closely into it. Scott and I talked briefly about it, and I've just kind of been a bit swamped with other stuff that I haven't jumped into the numbers. But I can't say that my initial hunch was I don't agree with it, and maybe I'm setting myself for failure here. But it just seems to me like it doesn't quite track, and I know it's kind of a larger conversation on like the war against aim point and some of that stuff, which to me, I'm a big believer in kind of that methodology of reading greens because again, it's kind of just like physics and geometry, right? It makes sense to me. I know that that's like a bit of a controversial issue as far as aim point and whether it's good or bad for the game of golf. But listen, like the data has only gotten better, and I just don't trust some of the historical data to be as accurate. Right. So
Totally fair.
I do give a bit of pause in the quality of the data that was shared on the tweet because like LPGA data is so far behind PGA data. And like when we're looking back at 5, 10, 15 years of putting data, I just worry that the quality of the data suffers compared to what it is now. And as a result, we're really making an unfair comparison because it's not really apples to apples.
That makes sense. I look forward to seeing what comes of
I'm
you
sure
diving into
I'm
the
sure
details.
myself or Scott will have an opinion on it soon, but I just haven't had the time yet to really unwrap it.
That's fair. So you've used a couple, I'm going to call them buzzwords for the sake of
Mhm.
our conversation: math, physics, geometry, numbers. So if I'm an athlete listening to you and you're giving me all of the numbers, the data driven, informed decision making protocols I need to be aware of, and I'm sitting here telling you, but Alex, I just feel like this is the chance. My gut tells me this. When you have an athlete that is so, I'm going to call them feel or gut instinct oriented, how do you help them use and leverage the math to their advantage without compromising their identity?
Yeah, that's definitely a struggle, right? Because you do have these players who um, I would say the numbers almost overcrowd their mind and make them feel a bit
Yes.
more hesitant or a bit more fearful. And,
Yeah.
there is a level of, call it like the artist versus the mathematician. And I do
Yeah.
give my players some leeway to that. But again, at the end of the day, like dispersion is dispersion, right? Like this
Mm.
belief that all of a sudden, because of XYZ factor, I'm not going to miss hit this shot is such a misguided idea. And, when we're talking about the Scotties of the world, the Genos, the Nellies, they all have shot patterns and shot dispersions. So to think that you're above that level, you're just fooling yourself and you're really setting yourself up for failure. And rather, I like to just tell my player, like, listen, this is sort of PGA expectation. And what a relief it should be that I'm kind of telling you what the mathematical target is. And your superpower or gift is hitting a golf ball a certain way, a certain target. So now just show me how freaking good you are. Right? Like this should be the reason that you should never miss hit a shot, because now you don't need to stand over a shot wondering, am I being too aggressive or too conservative? Now you get to stand over it with the utmost confidence that this is the target. Now let me get to show you how good I am.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, it's interesting. What really piqued my mind to kind of go a different direction as I was listening was like numbers could be very overcrowding, intimidating, and almost cause more stress and anxiety. So like I have an imagination. There's also just ample and consistent education from your end, helping them. I love your deck of cards analogy. Obviously, cards are near and dear to my heart. But when you're able to give them another framework to help them better understand how likely an outcome is, it can create peace of mind and helps make the data, in my words, more digestible.
hmm Definitely. And again, like it takes some getting used to, because a lot of players don't have, the way that you and I think about the game, which is very numbers heavy. But there
Mhm.
is a way to work that in for different players. Like you said, the feel player, if you're able
Yeah.
to sort of contextualize these things, maybe not even in a numeric sense where it might not resonate with them, but providing external examples of like flipping a coin, drawing a card from a deck of cards. And those real world examples can sometimes help give them that light bulb moment so that now they understand, like, okay, it isn't realistic for me to step up over a 15-footer with the expectation to make it. So now maybe they slightly shift their mindset in a way that it enhances their performance without drowning them in, like, well, you don't know the exact percentage that a 15-footer is made. But if you have a general idea of understanding, like, okay, here's a generic heuristic of from 12 to 25 feet. The name of our game is leaving ourselves a tap in, and that's a win. Well, now we've kind of simplified this activity and given them
Mm.
hopefully something they can lean on the next time they're facing an 18-footer, so that they're not overwhelmed by the emotions, the nerves, the moment. And instead they can sort of simplify it down to, like, okay, goal of this is to leave myself a tap in, right? Like look at Jacob Bridgman last week on Sunday, had that 20-footer on 18. And I don't know what he was thinking, but he probably certainly was just thinking like good speed, leave myself a tap in, and he failed horrendously at it and left himself a grindy little 3.5-footer. But like, though, in those moments, like the most pressure packed moment of his career, if he had that type of a crutch to understand, like, what is an adequate result here, and wouldn't it be nice to be able to lean on that in terms of just like simplifying and putting your mind at ease instead of it running 10,000 miles an hour?
If you're caddying him for in that moment on 18, what are your last words with him before he steps up to make that or hit that putt?
My go-to phrase is speed drill, right? Because I do a lot of speed drills with
Mm.
the players I work with. And my approach to putting is simply like everything is a speed drill, and you just kind of want the hole to get in the way or come out and grab the ball. It's like a visual that I really want players to try to incorporate. And it's very difficult because obviously putting is such an outcome driven activity. And so when I'm with my players and I'm caddying and it's a delicate putt or a high pressure moment, I'll borrow an analogy. When I was with one of my LPGA players at her US Open qualifier, on the very last hole, it was a 35 footer and kind of on like a 2.5%, 3% slope. And last words were speed drill, right? This is just a speed drill. Find your speed and maybe the hole will get in the way. And as luck would have it, she made it, and it ultimately didn't matter, thankfully, but like it's that mindset, right? It's getting her to focus on like you're probably trying to process making sure you nail the speed and the line and everything. And at the end of the day, like we know speed is the most critical attribute when it comes to putting performance. And so that simple reminder of like, this is just another speed drill. So just find your speed and we'll deal with the outcome and we'll respond to that.
If I'm listening right now and I'm a self-described intuitive field-based player, maybe specifically for this conversation, I'm the listener who hits the ball really long. So I'm always going for the green and two on par fives, as many opportunities as I get. Where do you direct me when it comes to beginning to familiarize myself with some of the data and the numbers I need to know to begin making better informed decisions?
Yeah, as a long player, right? And I see this a lot in specifically college players, right? I would start out looking at your par 5 bogey rate, right? Par 5s should be your bread and butter. Like that's where you should be gaining huge momentum and edge on your opponents. And so I always like to look at the par 5 bogey rates of players who are inordinately long or extraordinarily long, because you'd be surprised how often they're making some really stupid mistakes on par 5s. And it's like, what a
Mm-hmm.
travesty to have your length and you're making these bogeys. And it's largely predicated on, yeah, you got greenside in two, and you've almost like given yourself this entitlement to a birdie already. And rather than this acceptance of like, sometimes I send it green high and I just drew a bad lie in the bunker. I'm kind of short-sighted or things just aren't good for me. And rather than like exiting that mindset and shifting your mindset to a point of like, why don't you just get this on the green and make sure you make nothing worse than par? Instead, their instinct is, I'm going to put on my superhero cape and I'm going to hit the nastiest flop shot over this bunker because I've already been aggressive on my second shot. I'm a long hitter, so this isn't even a par 5 for me. So I'm going to treat this as I should make a 4. And then what happens? They dump it in that bunker, they blade it over the green, they make a 6 or a 7, and then you're just like, what a waste, right? Instead of thinking of it, think of it as like a race, right? So the short player that can't get their green side in two, they laid up to 100 yards. You're the long hitter. You're kind of got a yucky lie in the bunker. Well, the player back in the fairway that laid up from 100 yards, they have to hit like a tour quality shot to get it to like 15 feet, right? You in the bunker, if I told you to just dump it to 15 feet, that's probably something you could do with a very high degree of confidence, right? And it's just like this acceptance of this time you were aggressive and this time it didn't work out. And now we need to just like adapt. And that adaptability, I think, is something that a lot of longer players struggle with in like the outline you gave, because they feel like they almost feel like they're entitled to birdies when they step on the par 5 tee box.
I love that. And again, one of the commonalities in some of your examples thus far is the word should. Like I should make birdie here. And again, for you listening, let that be a buzzword, a key word to audit your own self-talk. If that should or that need begins to dominate, that should send off alarm bells of entitlement, of ego. So I'm curious, in addition to that situation, is there any other common situations you find that ego or entitlement is just dramatically costing golfers strokes?
Yeah, another great one is think of like short par 4s, right? So I kind of categorize short par 4s as holes where the majority of the field after a good tee shot is going to leave themselves with like a 9 iron or less, right, on their approach.
Okay.
So, if you're familiar with the Tiger 5 terminology, one of the criteria is bogeys with 9 iron or less on your approach shot. And like the simple way to explain it is, if it's a hole that plays where the field is averaging 9 iron or less, it's probably going to play, at like a relatively high level of golf. It's probably going to play under par because the rest of the field's just going to have like a scoring club in their hands. Well, if you make a mistake by being too greedy on those holes, right? Most common is like a front pin. And then the player, all they do is they laser that front pin and they think to themselves, I'm going to stuff this because I have a wedge in my hand. And they can't fathom or comprehend the possibility that they might mishit this shot. And then the next thing you know, they laser it 110. There's only 5 yards from the front edge to the pin. Dump it in that bunker, plugs in that bunker, chunk it out, chip on, 2-putt. You walk off the hole with a double or triple, and you're just like, what the heck just happened, right? And like that is a source of vulnerability that a lot of players have, because once again, you see it on the scorecard, and you're probably thinking like, okay, this is a birdie hole. This is a birdie hole. Then you pipe your drive, and then now you're thinking even more like, this is a birdie hole, right? I deserve birdie. I should make birdie here. I should stuff this. And next thing you know, a little doubt or a little miscontact creeps in your swing, and then now your ball misses the green, causes all sorts of bad things, and then you walk up to that shot already flustered because you're like, how is this happening? Like, I should be putting for birdie. I had wedge in my hand, and now I'm stuck in this bunker, short-sighted. And you lose focus, you lose concentration, maybe you get a bit unlucky with your lie. And like I said, you blink, you walk off the hole with a double or triple, and you've now lost 2.5, 3 shots to the field.
Yeah, really well said. A lot of good nuggets Alex is sharing. For those of you listening, there's a lot of moments here. You should go back and re-listen to the past few minutes. And Alex, I tell my listeners this all the time. Golf, poker, as well as entrepreneurship, they're all just mirrors of our individual personal development journey. And all three of them, I know you've experienced firsthand, require patience. They require discipline. And more often than not, success comes from a consistent execution of the boring basics. So starting with the term patience, how do you help your golfers really embrace patience or really strengthen their patience muscle?
Yeah, patience is not, especially in like kind of our era of like instant gratification, it is not a trait that is easily developed, right? I'm a bit older, so I would say that I've been a benefactor, I guess, of just kind of growing up with a different culture where we didn't have TikTok or Instagram Reels, and again, like just to borrow my experience with poker, right? With poker, you had to start somewhere, right? And poker is a game that like it takes a lot of failures and losing in order to get good. And it's something that you can't fake, right? It required a lot of study away from the tables. It required a lot of pain and suffering at the tables when you're making wrong decisions. And it's kind of trial and error, especially like back when I was kind of going through poker, we didn't have the technology or the access to solvers and computer programs that have kind of like structured, the proliferation of information wasn't nearly as high when I was like college aged playing a ton of poker. Same with golf, right? Like back in the day, it was you kind of just went to the golf course and figured it out. Compared to now, like you can fire up satellite imagery and chart a course that's in Riyadh without a sweat, right? And like you can, like when you're talking about patience, there is an element to it that comes with preparation, right? And understanding that there are resources out there like the Decade Driving Targets or Google Earth, where there's a reason that I am such a big proponent of players spending that 10 minutes of looking at satellite imagery or the tee packets that I make for them, because I want them to go in feeling prepared, right? Because a lot of kids, they'll go in with a practice round thinking, I'll just figure it out on site. And like the reality is, one, maybe you get rained out, right? Number two, you're playing a practice round with 5 of your teammates, with your coach who's probably got their orders and information they want to share. It's a lot of distraction, it's a lot of noise, and like it happens so fast. How nice would it be if you're able to fire up Google Earth and just look at a course and understand like, okay, on these, most holes it's pretty straightforward, but there might be like 3 or 4 holes in an 18-hole course that maybe require a little extra thought, whether that be laying up short of bunkers, whether it be realizing like, do you have adequate width to be hitting driver between these hazards? And wouldn't it be nice, kind of going back to that idea I said earlier of like standing over a shot with the utmost confidence and being able to stand over a tee shot and be like, I know mathematically I have the proper width here. So as long as I execute my shot to the standards that I expect myself to, I'm great. Right. And instead of standing over a tee shot, and as we know, course architects, they're there to trick you. They're playing with your senses. They're making you uneasy. And so standing over a tee shot on a Pete Dye course, like, is that bunker? Like, is this just is this an illusion? Is this bunker like in my landing zone? And then you fire up Google Earth and you're like, oh, that bunker is actually only 100 yards off the tee. Like, it's not even a thing. But as we know, they're masterminds of just deception and making you uneasy. And like, you only, college players, you get one go around the track before you're expected to play 54 holes of high level play. So why don't you save that energy for the competition? And then in your practice round, because you've kind of done that prep work, you're able to just show up, confirm that your like tee lines and everything are accurate. And then from there, like get a feel for the speed of the greens, and then you're probably set, right? Maybe there's a couple green complexes that require a little additional attention. But beyond that, like, I see players that, you talk again back to that word of patience. They get so impatient on like trying to exhaust themselves with understanding every nook and cranny on a golf course. And it's like, listen, most of the times, I've been telling my players this often, most of the times, if you're in like a spot where you're kind of short-sighted or it's just like a really, really bad position, you're probably going to make bogey anyway. And so you don't need to really exhaust yourself to figure out what to do in those spots, because the answer is usually going to be get your next one on the green and get out of there with a bogey, right? Because you probably screwed up somewhere along the way to put yourself in this position that you found this nasty spot, green side, long left, or whatever. And like, you just kind of have to pay your penance, right? It's like, okay, I screwed up. Course got me. I didn't execute to the best of my ability. Now I need to just like dump it on and move on.
Yeah, at that point, it's acceptance.
Absolutely, right? It's like you just don't get to overcome two bad swings with some super flop shot that maybe you execute at a 2% rate, right? The benefit just isn't there.
So dig into this more. I mean, you work with a lot of college athletes who are very much who were raised in the instant gratification era. So when we think about, and this is my description, and feel free to adjust it to your liking, but optimal golf could be described as boring. It's simple, it's decisive, it's numerically driven, and it's just repetitive. How do you help your athletes remain disciplined to the process and the preparation they've put in throughout 54 or 72 holes and not fall victim to the vast array of temptations and shiny objects around them?
Yeah, if I had that magic elixir, then I probably wouldn't have a job. But the reality is simple. Like, players resonate with things differently, right? So some players, it's figuring out like a practice plan or a playing lesson where we are trying to simulate situations to illustrate these ideas of like shot patterns, and again, understanding how large of a role luck does play in kind of your ceiling or your potential, right? And that can come in different forms of constantly, the rounds where you shoot well. I bet you, if I've had players go back and reflect when they've shot low rounds, and it's like, okay, go through and just tally for me how many of those rounds you had like a dead stock number on your approach shot, right? And they're always kind of surprised. It's like, well, out of 18 approach shots, like 16 of them were like a really clean number for me. And it's like, well, yeah, but that's why, think of the cascade effect of having a good stock number. You have a good stock number, you're making a swing you practice often. It's a swing you rehearse often. Now, as a result, the predictability of the shot's going to be higher. The dispersion of that shot's going to be a bit tighter. And then your dispersion's going to benefit, or your proximity is going to naturally benefit as a result of having a tighter dispersion. Well, now you like retrace that to an off number or like an ugly number, and it's kind of the opposite, right? Not a swing you rehearse often. Quality of contact is going to be suffer a bit, and then your dispersion is going to amplify. It's going to be a slightly bigger, and then your proximity is going to suffer, right? And like, when you aggregate those over 18 instances, you're naturally just going to shoot slightly worse, because your first putt distance is going to be slightly farther away, which means you're going to hole fewer putts, which means you're going to 3-putt slightly more often. And then if you get a bit greedy and you start not being patient, well, that's when you blink and it's like, okay, I didn't catch a good break today. I was constantly off on my numbers. And then I compounded that unluckiness and now shot 78, 79 and completely wasted one round of golf, and no matter how well I play tomorrow, I have no chance of making the cut or even contending in the tournament.
So I want to get your take on this too. Do you ever coach your athletes, whether caddying or coaching from afar, on putting together some form of a mental game within the game? So during a round, giving them various checkpoints. A common one I always hear is you're playing 6 rounds of 3 holes, or you're playing 3 rounds of 6 holes. Do you take an approach like that with any of your athletes?
I really stress with my players to just focus on the process, right? Like the results will take care of themselves. And it's funny because when I do like recaps with players, I don't ever want to hear about their birdies, right? They want to share their birdies like, oh, listen to this sick birdie I made. And I was like, I don't care. I want to talk the squares and the double squares on your scorecard. And it's so funny because they're always like, well, what do you mean you don't want to hear about my birdies? Like we could save that as like the dessert, but there's nothing teachable about making birdies, right? A couple things went your way. You probably did something exceptional, whether that be stuffing a tee shot or making a long putt. And after that, like, what is there to learn? And, to your point, like, that's why I really want players to just, your check mark is, did you, like a decade, we track the mental scorecard. It's that same idea. It's, did you go into the shot fully committed? And if so, we can live with whatever results happened, right? We're human. We all hit foul balls and hit bad shots. But the biggest disservice you can do to yourself is if you go in uncommitted and then make a poor swing, well, now you've completely lost the objective, right? So I really stress with my players. And one thing that I've been really stressing with them is when you're out of position, ask yourself, what Tiger 5 mistake am I kind of vulnerable to in this position? Because that oftentimes will be a really good checkpoint to tell yourself, okay, I'm kind of in the trees off this tee. Which Tiger 5 mistake am I going to make here? Well, it's probably the double bogey one, right? Okay, so now what steps can you take to remove that from play? Well, it's probably in the form of not hitting that little low cut 4-iron out of the rough under 5 trees and just like dumping it out with a punch 7-iron so you leave yourself a little 8-iron into the green. And then you take your chances of trying to get up and down. Same thing if you're short-sighted, right? Which Tiger 5 mistake am I going to make? Probably double chipping, right? So what steps can you take? Well, let's prioritize making sure our next shot is with the putter. And that may look like dumping it 10, 15 feet away from the pin. But going back to that idea, if you're short-sighted, you're probably already sort of statistically or probabilistically likely to make bogey anyway. And so we need to just take our medicine and move on.
Now, when you're caddying and you're there in the flesh with an athlete who has made a couple mistakes, maybe had a blow-up hole or two, and you notice the pattern of self-talk shift, the body language shift, anger hijacks the steering wheel of their decisions and actions, how do you approach that from a coaching and caddying perspective to get them back to that locked-in, focused state of being they need to be in to play great golf?
Yeah, it really starts with being hyper specific of the goal, right? So if it's a tee shot, it is being as specific of where I want their target to be. So an example would be like, I want not left center of the fairway, I want this rake that you see in the distance, and I will be like annoyingly specific with the target. It's like, you see that tree? Yeah, okay, now you see that branch that comes down? No, I don't. Okay, we're going to find this branch. And it's slowing down that process and really getting extremely granular with what the objective is, because like it starts by that one good shot. And then now, it's like, okay, we nailed it. And then now we move on and it's like, okay, the goal here is a green in regulation. The goal here is getting our lag putt inside the 10% rule and starting with micro wins, right? And like every player's a bit different, and some players you have to let them kind of relieve that anger, but it can't come in the form of a golf shot. It has to come in whatever like nasty self-talk you have yourself between shots. I'm fine with that, but then I recenter them to really getting goal oriented on finding a specific target, because that specific target is kind of how their brains work anyway, because we practice to like micro targets, right? So it's silly that over tee shots and stuff, we're not as specific with where we're trying to end our shot.
For those of you listening, that's such a phenomenal nugget there. Is, inevitably you're going to have the bad shot, the bad hole. How can you get incredibly specific, have that micro win opportunity, whether it's being incredibly specific with your target, just focusing on a green and regulation, but just like Alex shared, start stringing together a few micro victories to bolster that confidence, get the steady hit of dopamine coming back online so you can reset, refocus, get your state, your entire being back online where it needs to be to play to your potential. Now, on that note, though, we talked about this at the very beginning, so I'm glad we can come full circle. The blow up holes are inevitable. On the poker table, we know tilt for many recreational and even professional players is inevitable. And I'm sure you have far more hilarious and worse stories you've experienced in your professional playing. But on the golf course, do you have your own personal reset protocol that you instruct your athletes on, or maybe even yours on the poker table from long ago? Talk to us about what you found to be most beneficial in helping an athlete, a player, an entrepreneur truly reset to begin getting back online.
Yeah, for me personally, I typically am pretty good about staying centered. I think that probably comes from years of experience of not having as great emotional control, and it costing me heaps of money because, online you can torch it pretty quickly when things are going sideways. On the golf course, I do a pretty good job, I'd say, of not letting, like, I play in a game that we gamble for relatively large sums of money, and like the money doesn't bother me. And I again just like kind of focus on the things that I can control, right? So if my opponent happens to can a 40-foot putt and it costs me a couple $100, that's just golf, right? And the same as poker. It's like if you get all your money in as a favorite and then the cards run out and you lose, that's just poker. I always use sort of that analogy of like sometimes you're the bug, sometimes you're the windshield, and that's like just a very true statement because there are certain things that kind of again dictate whether you're a winner or a loser that day, right? Sometimes you get cold decked in poker, you get dealt pocket kings, and somebody else gets dealt pocket aces, and you're just supposed to lose there, right? There isn't like this magical strategy where you should have folded your kings pre-flop, because in the long run, once again, like objectively speaking, you're costing yourself money by not playing them optimally. Right.
Yeah.
And that might be like too big of a poker analogy for listeners, but just the idea is simply like you can't let the results dictate the decisions going into it. And that's the same way. And again, like that's not a great answer, I think, to your question, because I'm just naturally very good at staying objective. Right. So when my player isn't making any putts, right, I'm again that kind of annoying voice of being like, well, you hit good speed. Like, I caddied for an LPGA player in an event, and she was second in the field in greens and regulation through 36 holes, but literally didn't make a putt. I think she had 16 attempts inside 18 feet and didn't make, or between like, I think it was 8 to 16 feet. She didn't make a single one of them. And, she was mad because she missed the cut by one. But then here I am telling her like, well, it's just like, I'll take you hitting 30 out of 36 greens and being second in the field every single week. It just didn't work out this week. But that's the last thing she kind of wanted to hear, because she's like, well, I'm slamming my trunk and I'm going home with no check. And you're over here like, great job. Like you hit so many greens. And I'm just like, let's just carry that forward, right? Like, hopefully this is a good lesson for you of understanding, like, you literally putted your F game today and you missed the cut by one. Yeah. A mediocre putting week and you're probably top 10 without even batting an eye. Yeah. And so again, I always lean on like that objectivity and trying to stay objective, but I understand also that there is a difference in perspective, because at the end of the day, my LPGA player, this is her livelihood. Me as caddy, it's like, okay, well, thanks for the experience. Now I'm going to move on to charting your next golf course.
But I think your answer beautifully highlights, A, the power of numbers to help create that objectivity, which is a skill we can all train and develop over time. But two, it also really highlights the value of having a team. That golfer solely on her own, if she didn't have your voice of reason, your voice of data, she carries that frustration likely a lot longer. She might even, shortcut upcoming practice sessions or lack and slack in her preparation. And there can be a catastrophic downhill spiral there. Whereas again, your voice of reason as the caddy, as the numbers coach, and all of the other 15 hats you wear, but alongside, her strength coach, her mental coach, and whatever core group she has around her, that's inevitable. And I highlight that because whether you are here trying to earn your pro card, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're trying to leave your 9 to 5 to go all in on your side hustle, I come back to this quote that literally changed the trajectory of my life. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. The coaches, the mentors, the support systems, they serve as your foundation and your catalyst for achieving next level success.
Yeah, and that's so true. And kind of going back to, I've always been super lucky to just surround myself with good people, right? And And I've seen it in like my poker time. I had a great stable and network of people that we learned together, right? We studied
Mhm.
together, and we kind of like learned through each other's mistakes, and we at that time were all just super hungry to kind of learn and become better poker players. And then similarly, like from that group, I had another section that cut out into getting really into real estate investing. And if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have dabbled into real estate investing and bought some rental homes. And then from there, we had like another group that we started up a daily fantasy sports site. And like you just end up, if you surround, I'm a huge believer that like surrounding yourself with just sharp people, right, is such a great way to foster growth. And again, like with my nature of being a curious person, it's led to just crazy opportunities, right? With Scott, as an example, in my involvement with Decade, he was a general member of our poker training business that he joined us because he wanted to get better at poker while he was playing on the mini tours. And then through our like mutual love for the game of golf, we connected in the forums. And then from there, he built Decade, kind of mimicking us having training videos. And then we stayed in touch. I started helping some local kids with caddying and analytics and tournament preparation. And then from that like loose relationship with Scott and our like intertwined crossroads in the poker world, I'm now doing what I'm doing, which, if you told me 2 years ago that I would be literally helping LPGA and tour players, I would have thought you were taking crazy pills, right? And instead, it's just presented these really cool opportunities, and I've been able to kind of leverage my love for numbers and all of this stuff. And like, I never fathomed that I would be someone working with, like I don't have kids, right? I don't want kids. I would have never fathomed that I would be somebody who's like doing a Zoom call with 50 12-year-olds and talking golf strategy and then talking to their parents about private coaching and all of this stuff. And it's just crazy the direction that life takes you. But it's also like a function of when you surround yourself with sharp people and people that are motivated, driven, and passionate of different areas, you never quite know what opportunities are going to present themselves. But if I was kind of going lone wolf through all of this stuff, I would have never gotten into half of the projects and the fun things that I've been involved with.
I love that because again, you highlight curiosity as a catalyst for growth. So well said there. And then again, yeah, just the surround. I always come back to like if you are the big fish in the small pond, something is wrong. Like it's great that if you've worked yourself up from small fish into big fish, but it might be time to change ponds and surround yourself with people who are more experienced, educated, successful, so you can learn from their mistakes, their wisdom, their experience, and help you accelerate your own learning trajectory.
Yeah, and to touch on that, right? Like one of the traits I think of the players that I've been fortunate to work with is their willingness to accept that they haven't solved it, right? You deal with a lot of
Mm.
players who just have this attitude like they've kind of solved golf. And I'm not saying that like what Scott and I teach is necessarily, I personally think that it's like additive to any player's game to understand these types of things. But like at worst, you should hear it out and see how you can implement it and cater it and carve it into the great things you're already doing, right? I'm not asking my players to completely transform the way that they approach golf, but I do think that there are nuggets you can take to hopefully elevate your level of play, even if it's 5 or 10%. And this like complacency I see in some players is just a recipe for them stagnating, right? And them hitting this glass ceiling where they can't go to the next level because it could be a technical thing. It could be that, maybe they don't hit the ball far enough for them to contend on the PGA Tour. But it also could very well be like, I couldn't imagine dedicating my life to a life of professional golf or pursuit of tour and not leaving every stone unturned.
Yeah.
Right. And this like, I think complacency is just a great word because I do deal with a lot of players and coaches and stuff who feel like they've kind of like figured things out. Right. And again, like, I'm not saying that from a selfish position of like, oh, I would love to work with you, because I certainly would. But just recognizing that maybe there are certain elements you don't understand, right? Like I had, to borrow an example, I had one at a very decorated program, a coach who just didn't believe in data. He said, like, there's nothing satellite imagery can do to teach me about this course because I've played that course 10 times, so I know how to play it, and that's how I can tell my players. And it's like, yeah, maybe you nailed it, But at the same time, wouldn't you like to at least explore if there's some angle you've not thought of, right? Because at worst, we present what we found to you and you're just like, yeah, it all makes sense. At best, you find some new way. I mean, think about like Riviera, right? Victor Hovland going down the adjacent fairway was such a controversial thing. But then, or like number 10 at Riviera is another popular one, right? Conventional wisdom at that time was you probably just lay up on the hole, leave yourself a full wedge. And then now, as we've gotten more information and data, and Scott was certainly at the forefront of this, now you don't see any players laying up on 10. They send it and they figure it out, and then they still like scratch their heads when they make a dumb bogey. But that curiosity just breeds, innovation, growth, and hopefully new angles for these players to think of. Because again, their gift isn't to solve golf mathematically, right? That's just not them. Their gift is that they're really good at hitting the golf ball. And what if you can kind of incorporate some of the data to help instill habits, patterns, strategies that will just elevate your game?
Oh, that nailed it. I love that. And just again, curiosity. Yeah. And that inevitably is going to work itself into the title of this conversation. I love it. So I am curious, not to be redundant there. You've worked with some of the best athletes, LPGA, PGA Tour, everywhere in between. What is something these athletes do away from the course that maybe somebody who doesn't have the experience around such greatness wouldn't be privy to or aware of, that they are doing to help them maintain a sense of resiliency and emotional control when they are on the course?
Yeah, I think a very common trait that I see in these players is they invest in their mindset, right? They're obviously, like, every player is going to dedicate time to the gym, to diet, to hitting balls on the range and doing mirror drills with their putter. But the best players, they spend time to reflect, right? They sit down after a round and they will look back on things and try to apply an objective lens to how they did. And it wasn't simply, again, I shot 64, therefore nothing to learn. And instead, it's like they'll catch the most nuanced things, right? They'll catch themselves with maybe, a player that's just a very intense person that's kind of like laser focused, caught their self wandering because, a butterfly flew by on a hole or something, right? Everybody's a little different. Others need it the opposite, where it's like they need to be disassociated between shots, where they want to be humming a tune or thinking of something between shots because they don't have that intensity, and that's just not the way that they operate. But I think that like the consistent thread of all of it is they have this, they understand the investment and the value in reflection, right? And that allows them, like, I think the best players, one thing that I don't see enough players doing is when you're playing well, take video of your swing. Take notes of what your feels are, because I promise those will leave you at some point. And I have a lot of great players that have like a notepad on their phone that is like 50 different feels, but what they had at the time that worked for them. And then it gives you this archive or this catalog to go back to when you are inevitably struggling, to go back and be like, okay. And like the feels are so weird, right? Like I have one that his feel is he's delivering a pizza box, and then another one where he feels like he's, it's however you interpret it, but it's the fact that you are cataloging this so that you are giving yourself, your future self, a path to kind of hopefully revert back to your good feels. Instead of now you're scratching your head like, what was that feel I had 3 months ago? Instead, you have it on your phone, and maybe it doesn't work this time because obviously we like change physiologically, but it's having that like preparation. And at worst, you've wasted 3 seconds to jot down this feel, right? And instead of just gloating when you are playing well and thinking it's going to continue in perpetuity, now you're like taking the steps so that in the future, when that leaves you, you're giving yourself a pathway to potentially return to form.
Really well said. And my audience hears me harp on them all the time. There's so much power in reflection. It's a skill that needs to be mandated, developed, and prioritized. So I'm happy to hear you echo that with even stronger sentiment. Let me get us out of here on this, Alex. I'm always curious. Imagine there is a billboard centrally located on a golf course. It's visible from every tee box. Every athlete and player on the course can see it. And you have an opportunity to write your last takeaway message from this conversation on that billboard for all to see. What are you writing on that billboard?
Process, not results. It's just so important to understand, like, there are just so many externalities that you cannot control on the golf course. And so if you just focus on what you can control, you'd be surprised. Like, there is such a strong correlation when a player has like that good mental scorecard. And by mental scorecard, we're basically assessing like what percentage of your shots are you stepping into where you are fully committed to whatever your target and your yardage is, right? You're not stepping over it wondering if you have the wrong club, if you're being too aggressive with your target, uncertain what the wind is doing, literally stepping in and just trusting and fully committing to whatever you've now sort of created, right? Stepping into that shot, and you would be shocked how often the higher that mental scorecard is, the better the score, right? Because again, there are just elements of golf you can't control. You can't control where your shot ends up within its shot pattern. You can't control like the bounces you're going to get in the fairway or when you get gusted. But what you can control is like, I'm going to make a committed swing of 170 yards with my 7-iron at this target, and I'll deal with the results. Right. And like, yeah, maybe you get unlucky and you're short-sighted or you miss the green, but that's why you also work on your short game, right? You have done the preparation to equip yourself to deal with the unforeseen. But again, the biggest mistake you could make is like going into a shot without full commitment, and then the results are just going to be catastrophic. So process,
Love
not
that.
results.
Process, not results. Where can our listeners go to learn more about Decade working with you to improve their results?
Yeah. So if you find some of this stuff interesting, I post a lot of information like data visualization, graphs, infographics on my Instagram, which is Alex Huang Golf. And then decade.golf, if you're interested, we often get lumped together as just kind of a stats company. But I think what is really important to realize is where we provide a ton of resources to help players learn to score and learn to, from the preparatory phase all the way to like the evaluatory side of golf. We have all of the tools for that. So we've got driving targets and yardage books to help you prepare to play a golf course. We've got like the stats portal to help kind of post-round analysis. We've got practice combines to kind of give you guidance. And then we've got the training videos. We've got hundreds of hours of literal lectures and seminars and content that is geared to kind of distill a lot of what I've talked about in this chat into hopefully digestible rules of thumb or heuristics that players can take onto the golf course to reshape the way that they approach putting or the way that they think about their approach shots. And understanding these little nuggets can oftentimes be the key to, cleaning up like that low-hanging fruit, which are the shots that we walk away from a round of golf when your friend asks you, like, how'd you make bogey here? And the immediate reaction is just like, you kind of get that like bashful hesitancy to share because you like did something really stupid. Well, hopefully with like what we teach at Decade, those little things will clean up for you so that you're able to really reach your potential. Like, we're not all going to be able to shoot 65, but there's no bigger tragedy than not being able to match our potential because we're making mental mistakes.
Really well said. And I'll just echo that. It is literally a library of math and mental game assets that will dramatically help you improve as a golfer. And, my listeners know I've talked to Scott a million times. I've enjoyed our conversation so far on and off camera. And you two just have such an immense commitment and dedication to not only improving, but simplifying and continuing to just provide all of the resources necessary for all of your customers and members to be the best version of themselves on the course. So thank you for all that you guys do.
Yeah, thank you for having us on, and we're always excited to kind of hear of progress. And I think that you and I met at the PGA show, and that's always just such a breath of fresh air because it's just people coming up, and every one of them wants to share their low round and how good their handicap has improved, and it's refreshing, especially in like the era where most people who get in touch with us on social media are griping or have something negative to say. It's kind of nice to remember that there are people out there that are like benefiting from a lot of what we say and shooting their personal best scores or advancing through their US Open local qualifiers, or even just like advancing in their club championship, right? Like winning their first match play or getting to the match play bracket. Like those are big personal achievements. And like ultimately, the game of golf is something that we all love. And part of its, I guess, endearment is it's a game of imperfect, right? And like being able to tackle that and achieve success, however you draw it up, is always so rewarding to hear. Whether that be through an Instagram DM, somebody coming up to our booth at the PGA show, always just really fun to hear because everybody has different goals as it relates to the game of golf.
Yeah, really well said. Dude, thank you so much for joining me. This was a blast.
Yeah, happy to do it. And if you ever want to have a follow-up conversation, I'm more than happy to join you.
Yeah, we'll absolutely have you back. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. For those of you listening, so much value, so many takeaways. Do yourself a favor. Go back, re-listen. Make sure you've got the note-taking device handy. And most importantly, actually apply all of the wisdom and insights that Alex shared with us here today. And help your playing partners, help your buddies become better too. Share this episode. Everybody benefits from all of you playing better golf. You're challenged, you're pushed, and that's where the real growth occurs. And if you haven't done so already, it takes 30 seconds to leave a genuine rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to today's show. Again, I joke all the time, but I'm serious. It's your ratings, your reviews that give me the street cred to bring on such phenomenal guests just like Alex. So get that done. Have a great rest of your day. Hit them straight this weekend, and we'll catch you in the next episode.